I started to reflect what means traveling, because a lot of exhibitions and biennials generate or produce narratives about the entire surrounding. And this was the starting point, and I made the experience that all artists have different experiences with travelings, and our discussion now will be about paradigm shifts of the meaning of perception against the backdrop of globalization, but on the other hand, different situations or contexts of communications and art education. One of the most significant paradigm shifts is the work of Elisabeth Schimana, who is musician and sometimes visual artist. Your work was conceptualized for the Festival der Regionen here in Upper Austria, and later you shifted it to Siberia in a context of this biennial around the topic of Mir, which means the village.
Okay, it's somehow interesting right now to talk about it because it was in 2000 when I did together with Markus Seidel the project A Village Does Nothing. There were some very few questions. What does comfort mean? It is comfortable to do nothing. What does it mean to do nothing? Who is allowed to do? What about doing nothing? What we did is that we were searching for a village. Definitely for a village means for a kind of group which lives together in one geographical area. And doing nothing with us for 1 week. And what we did, we paid them for doing nothing. So this was the project in 2001, and now we have 2017, and actually we are facing a situation where lots of people are being paid for doing nothing. And if you show a project like this in Siberia, in Russia, it's very strange for them, you know, that people are paid for doing nothing. Because in the Soviet Union, and it's still a little bit like this, I think, of course, everybody had to work, even if they did nothing when they had work. But the paradigm of work, and we still relate on this paradigm of that everybody has to have a job. But we all know that this won't be possible in the future, and it is not now. This paradigm has to shift. So, to a paradigm, for me at least, that not everybody has to have a job, but everybody has to have the right to survive. And so that's interesting if you show a work like this, which actually took place in a little village in Austria, to a place like Siberia, where you have still complete different different cultural situation. Yeah, 3 minutes are over, I think.
To add a few sentences, the project has a lot of fans there. And on the other hand, there's a strong communist party in Krasnoyarsk. Krasnoyarsk has 1,200,000 inhabitants, and the Communist Party is very strong, and they are against the concept of this Lenin Museum because they say the program is not in the right sense of Lenin. So there are many different layers, but the younger audience likes this project, and the director likes it very, very much. Maybe you could continue with your statistics.
Yeah, well, it's not. I just took the image from from Google that I could kind of present somehow.
It's a statistics data, and maybe you can tell some of the people from where you come and what was your, let's say, cultural surrounding.
Yeah, so I come from Bosnia and Herzegovina, but I currently don't live there. But anyhow, I mean, since 3 years I was, before 3 years I was living still there. And this is my second residency, actually, and so if we are here speaking about some tradition of residency and travels as a practice for artists, but I don't have so much experience in that, and I'm still kind of experimenting to see if it fits to my artistic practice or so. But the thing that was interesting for me to talk maybe about is this residency and travel as a visual education, so possibility and input and output that we were getting, for example, in Bosnia. So when I was speaking with Roland about this topic, we got to the sector of internet and actually how you get some informations about, for example, open calls or any other possibilities what's going on outside of the borders of Bosnia. As a post-conflict country, I mean, I got my first internet connection in 2010, which is quite late for someone. But it was not accessible to everyone, so that everyone could afford to have it. So you're immediately limited to a certain knowledge, or what someone else, like professors, give you, or your colleagues. But the problem, it was not just to get knowledge from outside, this input, but was also problem the output. I mean, it's also today still the problem of traveling because of visa and other circumstances. And how to get also the economical possibilities to travel anywhere, to actually see if residencies are okay for you or not. So for me it was that interesting to actually see how whatever we organized in Bosnia, there is no residency program in Bosnia. So if you want to go there, it's only on your own expenses, or if it's financed by someone outside, usually by West. And so that's quite pity. And so if we also did a project last year, I'm a co-founder of a small project organization for popularization of contemporary art in Bosnia called Apartman. And then we got funding from Austria actually to organize a residency program, but for Austrian artists in Bosnia, which is again something amazing because we got some kind of input from outside. But again, without internet, that was, I mean, before, I'm quite young, I'm like 25, and for me was, 5 years, 10 years ago, I got my internet, and then I tried to explore and got to this world of open calls. And then I started to send to the festivals, to the residencies to see what's going on. But again, it's still limited, and the number, the proportions of how many artists we have and how many of them actually are going.
Do you think you can?
I mean, this is very old picture. I'm so sorry, but it's till 2013. Nowadays, like everyone have internet. But at that time, you can see the proportion of number of people that lives in Bosnia, like 3.5 million, and then the proportion through years, how many of them had internet connection. And so it's not just artists, but everyday person like who has any kind of internet connection. And now it was growing, of course, proportionally. But I don't think that that's just Bosnian problem. It's a problem from transitional societies and developing countries, because I think that's also one of the main problems.
And very exciting is your. Let's say life or working situation, because you are shifting your working situation and let's say your perception between Barcelona and Cuba, and this is very strange. So now you're in a kind of triangle between Vienna and these two situations.
I mean, in the first talk that I was with Roland, we get that topic. I mean, I come from Havana, but I am living also in Barcelona, and I normally travel crossing the ocean. For me, something interesting that happened when I traveled 10 hours in the plane is the jet lag. When I arrived to Havana, I have 6 hours of jet lag, but this is not only happen because the space is also happen in terms of ideological jet lag, also and in terms of time. And for me, that concept could be applied for so many projects that when you build that, when you make that project in some place, and then when you move that project to another place, something happens, no? In the way to the people can understand or get another reading of the project. So the project that I want to show you to you is Sinister Despolitization. Probably a couple of you know about it because I showed that project yesterday. And it's about the Czechs. The Czech, probably you know about it, is the torture calaboose that the Republican government did in Spain during his civil war. But they use the avant-garde design of Bauhaus, I mean Moholy-Nagy and all that design, but they apply all that designs in order to torture people, I mean people from the fascist army, but it's an instrumentalization of the art by the left. And that was really interesting for me because already now the left trying to forget that kind of things on instrumentalization of art, but they still trying to instrumentalize the artist for his ideology. So what I did, this is, well, in Barcelona, I did first the project in Barcelona, and this is that I did. It is a decomposition of all the elements that you can find in the Czechs. The tile of it, I mean, it's in wood because it was the material that they use in the Czechs. And this is the displays that I did in Havana also. And of course, I mean, my point with that instrumentalization is what happens when you as an artist don't have a control of the lecture of your project. I mean, normally you do a project, but then some ideology can take your project and build speech statements on your project out of your hands. So, I mean, this is a picture of Fidel Castro with an abstract project. And also this is a picture of Pedro Sanchez, is the president of the Socialist Party in Spain, in front of the Joan Miró artwork. So this is my question that I try to hear to the panelists. What is, I mean, if we can have the control of the lecture of the art that we do or not?
I think from all these different views, there is something we can bring together. We will do it afterwards because the main question here is the shifting of contexts and the paradigm shift of the perception of the work, because the artistic work maybe in Krasnoyarsk has a total different meaning, or maybe more subversive meaning than it has had in Upper Austria, for example. And your term is to control. How can you control the meaning? Let's end here. You are a little bit skeptic.
No.
Okay, yeah. And a complete different approach has Kamen Stoyanov. Your background is you came from Bulgaria to Austria, studied here, and now you have a teaching position.
Yeah, no. Yeah.
Yeah, you're a university assistant at the Department of
Painting, yeah.
of Painting here at the University of Applied Art.
Good. So I was thinking about this shifting of context, and so we have the artist, we have the piece and the place where this piece is exhibited, and so usually we have to transport that this piece is transported, and so the first work I'm very shortly going to show that I was thinking what is going to happen when the art is the transportation itself, the transportation of the body, so there is no other work than this, and it was a project shot in Slovenia in one off space called Ex-Garage.
Excuse me if I interrupt you. As far as I understood, the transport itself is one topic in your artwork.
Yeah, so
the transport of the art.
Because there was, for example, this project is the traveling into the exhibition space, becoming the performance and the work. So I'm arriving in the exhibition space with the car, which was a garage before, and open the boot of the car, and this is the art piece. Because, unfortunately, the sound now coming from the computer.
Come here, guys. Yeah, come. Come inside. Yeah, it took me 13 hours to drive here. So I just arrived. Yeah, from Bulgaria. Yeah, because I brought you something. I brought you a Curator. It's in the car. Yeah. Yes, I brought you this Curator from here.
So actually what I brought was this full boot of yogurt in the car, which was with the brand Curator, but so I brought to the, was driving to the exhibition space 13 hours, and I did the driving license for this project. So before I didn't have
and this is part of the work, of your entire work, the traveling and the transport of the work and so on.
And so it's also like, in terms now I'm shifting to artist in residence. This is my arriving in Los Angeles, where I had the Max Schindler Stipendium.
Okay, there you had the Schindler Stipendium in Los Angeles. I'm not sure if all here in this round know what the Schindler Stipendium is. Schindler was an Austrian architect of the modernity, and this program is led by the MAC, by the Museum of Applied Arts, and it's a house with garden in Los Angeles. It's a very significant building of the West Coast modernity, but it's a complete different context as we see.
And so we have seen how as I arrived, but this work was the first I did there, was in the first week, but actually it's like a metaphor for when you bring somebody from so far away in a totally different context, like you're falling from the sky into the,
As far as I understood, it's a little bit absurd and let's say an ironic commentary, like what this issue of transport means.
Yeah, but we can talk about it.
Okay,
what does it mean to shift the artist to send it as a positive, but also has a lot of difficulties that are appearing with this. So for this project, I was somebody was importing something, importing your ideas, your history, your stories, then mixing, and so this was my project. Where I was growing tomatoes with imported tomato seeds, and at the end I produced tomato soup. This is just the house in the background, and me with this car. So you can see that the car fits very good to the house. So I was like, buying this car, I was looking for a specific car that it fits to that, and so everything is together, comes together. And this, the lyrics are a song I wrote about the project. It's telling the whole story. It sounds like whatever. Near a brig was an idea, upside down and mid down, what I should to put the Bulgarian foot and so on. But there's also a song, there's a book, and the last, maybe you can hear a little bit. So Andy is the Andy Warhol, and, because he was also presenting his Campbell soup in Hollywood. The context. And now the last residency was in Istanbul just last year. I did a film about the building of the new airport, which is going to be the biggest airport in the world. It's not finished, but should be open actually next year, the first stage of the airport. And I went to Turkey just 1.5 months after this putsch, and so the situation was very anxious for everybody, and so many people. We were 4 people, and 2 of the people didn't. One stopped the residency after 3 weeks, and another didn't appear at all. But I stayed all the time. But not only this, so I was told not to cross some rules and borders, but I did actually totally the opposite, because I found this project of the airport, and actually interfered with the whole situation. in quite a dangerous way. Yeah.
But to bring now some issues or topics together, I would first start with Elisabeth, because Elisabeth Schimana is traveling as a musician, and I think only a few times as a visual artist. And so
never as a visual artist.
Sorry?
Never as a visual
Never
artist.
as a visual artist.
No, I'm not a visual artist at all, but you could call it, I don't know. I'm very much on the border between sound and media art, and of course sometimes there what you call, I don't know, art in social space, or yeah, something like this, but not a visual artist, definitely not.
Yeah, so this was only a singular project you realized
art.
in Upper Austria.
It's just many works do work in a kind of exhibition environment, but I never would say that this is visual art, you know. But we have lots of sound work in exhibition spaces. This is a kind of documentation of a project, really. You know, but because of the film, because we made a film, and people like this film really. So it was exhibited, actually the project was exhibited in Germany, we were in Switzerland, and so on and so on. But usually it always also goes together with a very hard discussion about, for example, I don't know the word in English, bedingungsloses Grundeinkommen. Do you know the
basic income?
Basic income, for example. There were lots of discussions in Germany when I showed the project and about basic income, for example. So it's always contextualized somehow. And now in Krasnoyarsk it was different because the main topic was the village. And of course also in this project,
was the topic of the entire biennial.
Biennial. It was also in Austria, it was really also about the village, because it was so interesting to find that these people in the village, they never had made vacations. It was for the old ones we had in this project, you know, we had from, of course, children, we had the oldest one was 100-year-old. So for the old ones, they never had vacations. They didn't even think about vacation, you know, because there is always something to do if you work on the fields, you know, if you grow your stuff and so on and so on. So yes, so the village definitely was also one very important topic of the project.
But my question is, usually you travel as a musician. And maybe it's much more easier to communicate with sound, because now you explained it's necessary to explain the entire surrounding. It's a communication project. From my perception, it's not only a documentation. It's like a social intervention. Where you show it. How do you see this difference between your sound performances and showing this singular artistic work or documentation of an intervention?
The main difference is that if you play a concert, it's a complete time-based thing, art. So you do something for, I don't know, 20 minutes, 40 minutes, whatever, and that's it. If you are in an exhibition context, it has a different, it's somehow static, it's not moving anymore, it's something, you know, it's lasting for, it's the Zeitbegriff, yeah, is a complete different. And usually if you do a concert, you are not going to explain anything, because sound is going usually right away into your body, and that's it, and people can feel it. With the visual thing, it's different. You have much more distance. I have the feeling to what you see. Mm-hmm. It doesn't go so direct. Sound is always is a medium which goes so direct into the bodies of the people. So that's a big difference to me, for example.
But when you travel around and play concert, you appear as Austrian musician.
As an Austrian composer, really.
Austrian composer, yes.
And yeah, yes.
With international language.
Yes.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
That's a big question. I mean, I was at so many places, and then there is this question: is there a cultural difference anymore, or do we have the same background, no matter if we are talking about visual art or conceptual, whatever, about any art? Do we talk a global language? And where actually are the differences, or do we have differences? I mean, you are coming from remote places, from other places, not even from the West, you know, or more from the East, from the far West. That's a question to me, really, because I think we have a global language, of course, also because of communication technologies. But then, to me, it's very interesting. I like to go to places and stay there for a while, always, not less than at least 2 weeks, 3 weeks, because only after this amount of time you can have some kind of idea what's going on in the scene or what's going on there. And then, slowly, I think you start to find some differences in the second layer. I don't know how you feel it.
To show you the museum in Krasnoyarsk, this is a picture of the museum. It's like a post-socialistic Fitzcarraldo project, because you see it is damaged, it is nearly 20 years old, inside it's totally cold, on some places it's raining inside because there is no money to repair the roof and so, the director is fighting to catch people. They try to get a younger audience to this kind of museum. So it's really, there's really a big difference. On the other hand, at the time when I tried to study your work, I'm not sure if I'm right, you are dealing with some, let's say, local visual narratives. I don't would describe it as Bosnian narratives, but narratives more from the south. For example, you use instruments of grilling, or something like this, and you pick up things from daily life which are meaningful.
Yeah, well, I'm not, well, how I do put that, I'm not like picking the everyday, I'm dealing mostly with everyday situations that are real and not fictional, but not every situation. So I like to find particular moment or instrument or object that it's like a point of crossing of certain phenomena that could be a starting trigger for a bigger discussion. For example, the one that you mentioned, it's a pig piece, like that you're roasting a pig on it, and for me it was interesting. It's super common in Southeastern Europe, and it's actually a traditional means of tradition, paganistic habit to have it. And I wanted to mention that because recently I had an exhibition in Slovenia. So, but when you live in non-European country, you have a border rules how to transport the work. And that was, for me, Kamen's work very interesting. So I live in Germany, so I was coming from Germany, and galleries were supposed to bring my works from Bosnia. And I live directly on the border with Croatia, and he didn't succeed to bring it because he told, oh, it's an artwork, so it's quite easy to transport. But then the police returned the artwork because he didn't have proper papers. And then tomorrow I went with him, we just changed the car, we took a private car, and I said, I'm getting married, so I need this, I'm going to Germany. And we went, it's the same people, the same border, 24 hours afterwards. So that was interesting for me, how you deal with transport of artworks. Yeah.
It's interesting, but I've never had problems with this because all the works I transported, they don't look as an artwork.
Yeah, this also don't look as an artwork.
I never make a document because it's something that they never believe it's an art. It's, it's yogurt or it's, I don't know.
This also doesn't look like an artwork, but when you dismantle this, really looks weird because it's it's 2.5 meter one, and you have this. It's everything handmade. But the problem is that the guy who was transporting, he said it's an artwork.
Yeah.
And then when you say that something is an artwork, you should have proper papyrology to cross the border. I like that my friends, for example, from European Union, some of them never crossed the border, which is really absurd for me. So whenever someone is going to South, I always go with the bus, not with the plane. Then it's a different experience. So yeah, tomorrow I went and I said, yeah, I'm getting married. So it's like, well, why you need 8 of them? And it's a big traditional wedding. So it was super easy to get then into the border. But if you claim as an art, then it's a problem. But as you said, so I like to play with these everyday objects or situations. And yeah, I would not say it's just local. I would say it's my own experience. And, I could never divide my own practice from my own observations. And then I'm using this experience in a way to explain certain problems or what I think is a problem.
But here I try to pose a question. Do you think to show such an installation in, let's say, southern parts of Europe or in the local context from where you come, people interpret it maybe a little bit different than people here or in Hamburg or whatever. Maybe people in your the context from where you come say, what, this can be art or so?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, there is different levels of interpretation. For example, in South, in Balkans, they would immediately know what is it. And they will have drooling, on there because it's something that you use for hedonistic purpose, for food. But how it's installed, and they produce sound as well, which is quite creepy because of metal. So then you feel it's quite disturbing piece. But when I was showing this, like proposing this work in Germany, for example, of course they know what is it. They also have it, They have these festivals, they roast pigs, they roast like other animals, but it's not so vivid and present in everyday life. It's just for certain occasions. And for us, it's like everyday life. Whatever happens, you roast something. So, of course, they understand in certain levels, but not that kind of absurdity that is present, for example, in South. And what I also wanted to say about this travel, so I'm commuting between Berlin and Bosnia already for 3 years. And yeah, I have also a studio over there. And for me, what's interesting when I go back, the difference of time and how you perceive time. For example, for me, like 48 hours, 2 days in Bosnia, it's equivalent to 2 months in Germany. It's totally different how you perceive time. I live in a village, I live on farm, and also you're totally disconnected. I mean, we don't have internet or so, but it's the way, the context and how culture, how people think, and, then when you distance yourself and then come back to the place where you come from, then you become more sensitive to the problems. And for me, it's more brainstorming. So these 48 hours in my home country, it's really brainstorming for me. So I need, like, when I go back, then I kind of can accumulate ideas again.
People who live in, let's say, Berlin or in Vienna, Hamburg or wherever, in bigger cities, artists mostly communicate with artists. And how is this for you when you are at home? Is there a vital art scene, or is the communication situation different?
You mean like in Bosnia?
Yeah.
Well, in Bosnia you have like two centers. You have Banja Luka and Sarajevo. I call them their two capitals somehow. And that's, of course, I have my own friends there and former professors, and there is one institution that is quite functioning over there. But when I go to my home country, hometown, there is no vivid art scene. I mean, of course, I have friends and I communicate in that level, and I have still projects going on over there. But I'm mostly, when I go there, I'm not in a it's really rare that you go by for job or to propose something or to work on an exhibition. If you meant
yes,
that with a question.
It was
so
this.
I'm mostly with, among common people, if you would say that, that are not artists.
Because, for example, here in Vienna we are, let's say, when you are in the so-called art scene or art world, I would say, your way of life has the tendency of living in a kind of elite because you only communicate with people who are in the same discourse or so, and not in daily life issues or topics.
Of course.
This was the question.
Yeah, I mean that's also one of the reasons why I really like to choose to, for example, all these works that I have is something mostly that everyone has around them. Whether they live in village or in house, they have something around them, and they can. So it's, you know, when my family comes from to exhibition, they don't ask, oh, why is this art? They actually now understand, you know, because they recognize they have that behind their house or something like that. So I like to get to that level to approach the public, because I think, you know, the contemporary art, it's not so distant to everyday life. It's actually all about it. So
And in your work, the transport or the paradigm shift is a central part, as far as I understood. And what does it mean, this kind of, let's say, transportation? What's the main idea when you do it? Sometimes I think you do it, you destroy a work, or it can be damaged.
I mean, it's just getting aware that it's also a practical, it's a problem that we have to deal with it. Like when you plan an exhibition which is far away and there's not so much money for the transport, we have to find ways. And so it became
more and more performative.
Yeah, we have to find ways, or the plans, it became performative. And I think for me it's much more interesting, you know, in terms also because I'm, not this objectivity of the art, you know, like this objects making, which is like, very much, I see very much conservative thinking, you know, in terms of expensive objects that we know. But before the artwork is in the studio of the artist, and somebody comes, like, have to be packed professionally. The transportation company is coming, and with the gloves and the but then it's come back to your studio, your package, and I'm taking it with my hands. And it's like totally different paradigm, you know. And so this
so
is. I like to question this and
how to switch the notions of like when it's important, when not.
Also, but like if you're longer into this in the art, in your studio is getting smaller and smaller. We have more and more stuff, you know. It's like the studio is getting into the storage, and so I always was trying to find a way how to deal with it, and this is because I was very much interested in, let's say, praxis that does not produce so much material. Like, for example, I was in Istanbul, like, making this film. It's fantastic because we can. This film was done 6 months ago and already was shown in 7-8 exhibitions around Europe. We just can send a link, everybody can download it and show it.
So the work at last is a film or a documentation of the performative aspect.
Could be this or that. So in Istanbul, it was a film. It's not about the transportation, but it's the issue is against the building of the biggest airport in the world. So it's also again a question of mobility and transportation of human bodies. And what this exactly means, you know, because it's destroying totally the nature. We don't have to forget, because we speak very much positive about this moving issue, but it's also for artistic problem, because we are moving a lot, but we are destroying the nature. You know, it's like a inner conflict in the same way. You know, what I mean.
And is traveling for you research too? You told us you lived in Los Angeles. You told us about this large airport in Istanbul, which has this to do with research, or what is the
you have the possibility
exchange
to go
of
to learn, to see new things, to go deeper into context. Yeah, it makes for me sense when you go as an artist in residence to stay at least 2-3 months. And then to go again and again.
And how stays this in dialogue with your work, this, let's say, different places or venues where you stay? Because Los Angeles is a total different situation than Istanbul.
Well, you can find similarities in terms of, I don't know, cars, how they move, how the city is organized in terms of traffic, for example, or in terms of or in terms of nature in the city. You know, it's like.
But not so much the social environment or how people live, or so. Or is this a topic for you in your artistic work?
Yeah.
Is my question. You travel between 2 continents. I think you are working in 2 studio situations. And
studios?
Yes.
No, I don't use it.
No, or you have only your studio is only in Barcelona.
No, I don't use the studio.
You don't have any studio.
No, I prefer the bar to.
The laptop is a studio.
Yeah, no. Well, if we understand laptop as a studio, yeah, for sure. But only one traveling with me. No. I mean, for me, the idea of a studio, I don't feel comfortable with the idea of a studio, because I mean, I feel like a nomad. I'm a little bit. So if I have to travel, I can be in love with only one space. So. I don't know, the bar is more seductive for me than with the actor working, but not in a studio.
And the input you get when you go from one city to another city, there's a totally different political situation, totally different cultural background, total different history, world political history.
Yeah.
Has this any impact?
Yes, I mean, not only traveling to Barcelona, the rest of the place that when I will be there, I mean, 2 years ago I was living in Beirut for a year, and that was a really strong experience, but also when I visited Canada or the different other places that I did residency or only shows, they are always give me new experiences, and of course that I can see this in my work. But I mean, the 2 political situation is something relative in some points. I mean, because now, particularly in Barcelona, they look really close to Cuba in terms of repression, for example. I mean, now all the people in Catalonia, they want to be independent, they are doing the votation to be free, and the government is have an approach to go to war. I mean, sending to Barcelona tanks and all the army to be the people scared about the army. And in Cuba, for other hand, now we are more happy with the relation with US. And
yes, but my question is the impact to your artistic work.
It's evident. I mean, it's yeah, for sure. Yeah, it have a complex impact in my work. But how?
To make a jump to another kind of, let's say, production form, let's go to the radio. To Elisabeth Schimana, you, I think yearly, you are working on a radio feature about your traveling experiences, or music and traveling. In Austria, we have a late night radio magazine called Zeitton.
Kunstradio.
Kunstradio, okay, Kunstradio, sorry.
Which was founded with the idea, what can fine art do with radio? It was actually a program for fine artists doing work for radio. That's how it started, and that's actually is the whole, was the initial idea, you know, of this radio program. And so Kunstradio actually is more than just a program. It's an institution in Austria, because many media artists went through this kind of education of Heidi Grundmann, who founded Kunstradio. But anyway, yes, so in the last years somehow I did each year one bigger travel, let's say for between 1 month, 1.5 months, or something like this. And then I do record, and I bring these impressions not in pictures, but in sound. And with these recordings, I go to the studio and I do a live radio show. That's actually what I do. And it's a kind of, yes, memory, an acoustic memory of a space. And for each place, I find a different concept. I have a different concept, what to do and how to record, for example, what to record. For example, okay, for Moscow, when I did this, I lived 2 years in Moscow, so this was a long period. I lived 2 years there. Then I recorded lots of stuff and made this. Then for Odessa, you know, these stairs, famous stairs, you know, Eisenstein film. Yeah, you know the film. So I made a very strict, because I went every day to a different day of time. I started 7 o'clock in the morning, half an hour. Next day, 9 o'clock, half an hour. I went to the stairs and did recordings. And somehow, what's the material you get? Or in Mexico, I was in different cities. I traveled to 4 different places, and then I thought, what is the radius? The radio, el radio. Yeah. If you put the microphone only where you live, in which hotel, you go from hotel to hotel or from place to place. So where do you stay, and what? Only this radius. What you can find, you know, what kind of sound you can find. And Sao Paulo was just so awful. It's the awfulest piece I ever did, because this city is, as an acoustic environment, extremely awful, just awful, because you have only, I couldn't find any place of peace, acoustic peace in this city. So that's, of course, and then you bring this to the radio. And I really like this radio space, because it's a space where you have no idea who is out there.
There, I want to pose a question. Bringing together what you doing and you doing in different, let's say, city contexts or cultural contexts, I think what you do is a kind of sound research or collecting sound ready-mades, local ready-mades, and you are dealing with some topics, visual topics that are contextualized, local, but not so much local. But it's necessary that people understand. Does it come from the south or from Hamburg, for example? And so my question is, where's the difference between the danger dealing with a cliché, for example with a sound cliché or with a visual cliché, or some, let's say, a part of the so-called reality you can transport? Is this a question for you?
Yeah, I mean, of course, and I mean, you don't know what I have in my head and what I think could be, as I said, like a trigger for some discussion. If I propose some opinion or some idea about some, for example, this work or some other videos that I did that are taken from a, let's say, local context that I come from, but I'm not looking at them as a local because they are really recognizable everywhere. When you see the behind story behind that, you know, like the purpose or something. So of course, but when you put it in front of the public, then you get more answers about your own work and how it functions in a different context. I also had a very interesting work that someone could say it's a local. It's about it's a video called work called "We Have Wonderful Life." And it's about migration in post-war migrations, that my family moved to Australia. So, and then we were giving back these messages, that there was this digital communication with photographs and VHS tapes. They were sending us back to those families who stayed in Bosnia. And then I was presenting that project everywhere in ex-Yugoslavia, and the reactions from them was they totally understood, and they went out their own experience about it, because everyone had these kind of tapes here in their house. But when I presented this project in Germany, public who saw these tapes were those who were sending these tapes. So it was opposite situation. It was not those who were receiving, it was those who were sending. But again, everyone understood the meaning. It was something that I took from my own personal archive, and which I really prefer to do. But it's not something that is just mine. You know, no one cares about Mila Panić, you know, but it's about what they see, where I can recognize from their own experience, and then start to question if it's right or should be questioned or deleted or erased or transformed. So that's what I like to play with. And of course, in different contexts, you can never know how it's going to react. But I think every reaction, it's true and it's okay.
I want to add a question later, but coming back to the sound, I think your collected sounds have to be recognizable, that this is Mexican or Sao Paulo.
No, not really. I mean, of course you will find we have, again, a global situation. And the cars are everywhere, planes are everywhere. It's, especially in cities, it's a lot of noise everywhere. But then again, this is again the same question. So we are globalized, we have a kind of common language, we are digitized, but then the question is, where is the difference? And that's what I am always looking for. Where is the difference? What can I find, even in this total globalized environment? Where are the little differences? And then you can find them. And that's interesting. Because, for example, Sao Paulo, I don't know any place in the world. I was not everywhere, but people told me that it's nowhere allowed that the rich people fly with their helicopters from place to place, which is not allowed anymore in New York, for example. You know, it was for a time, but then it was forbidden. But there, people fly really, if they have money, they fly from building to building, skyscraper to skyscraper with their helicopters. Nobody is taking public transport or even cars anymore because it's just impossible there. So this makes a sound environment because there is not 1 minute silence because in the air it's continuous. I mean, we have lots of planes, you know. If you listen,
you have this. It reminds me in Los Angeles, but the helicopters, but it's the police, you know. So
it's the police,
yeah,
but there it's the rich people, you know, continuously. So these are then interesting.
Yeah.
You know.
When you say this, I'm hearing the helicopter.
Yeah. So. And like Mexico is really, it was fantastic because you have so many people making music on the street, or even the people delivering the gas. They are like singing when they come. You know, when they come with the gas to the. So, of course, there's difference.
What I like, what you are doing, Kamen, is that you show that it's really hard to transport, and it can be hard and difficult to travel. We were at the beginning of our talks, maybe it sounded very exciting to travel as a curator, journalist, artist, or whatever, but to be honest, something I hate it, because wherever I am, I get a lot of books, and these books are totally heavy, and in New York there's no elevator, and in Moscow, as you know, there are some staircases to the elevator, but it's very difficult to travel with these books or so, and you walk more than you see exhibitions. You are in museums, let's say, 20% of the day, and the other part of the day you are searching the way, asking or whatever. But would you say you are showing global experiences, or it's your personal experience, or it's your personal way of perform this? What is it? Yeah, is this my question is this let's say, international experience of the art scene, or is it a personal way of perform this?
Both, I think it's both.
Yeah.
But, yeah, it's very hard to travel. Yeah. And I mean, I also have some books, but not only this, I'm like all the time. My problem is with the technique, because, you know, I have like the cameras and the lenses, the movie camera, the photo camera, this recorder is getting more and more. And so I cannot put everything in the hand luggage, because already my hand luggage is maybe 20 kilograms, you know. And I cannot put this down because it's very expensive, the computers and stuff. And I develop techniques to have jackets and to have pockets, you know.
Yeah, I have a lot of friends.
Like, it's a little bit like a soldier, you know, like a soldier.
I have a lot of friends that actually is their way of living, you know, going from one art residency to another. And if we think of, you know, emerging artists, that's sometimes the only way to survive. To use your own idea, especially, I mean, there is different types of residencies, those who are funded and those who are not funded. And, you know, there are young artists that, you know, just jump from one to another. I mean, the quality of produced work in the context is not always the same. But I have friends that are just like jumping through the whole year in the different places. You know, for some time, in my opinion, for myself, I think for me it would work for some years, not more. But, you know, for them, it's, you know, it's their paycheck, you know, every month, that's how they live. Otherwise, it would not be possible to move if it's from a very distant country, but also like, so they don't have nothing. They have different way, they approach their strategy in art, shifted differently so that can be put it in different contexts, how they produce, for example. So they don't have cameras, they don't have nothing. So whenever they go, they shifted their practice and medium, how they work. That's interesting.
Now see you or your way of living a little bit different than some days ago, because now you seem to be a kind of, let's say, nomadic computer photo making artist. Is this right? Traveling around wherever the worldwide residency programs lead you or guide you?
Yeah, probably the residency, decide the destiny of my next travel, It's like,
So I want to come back what you told before, because at last we have to complete our discussion in about 7 or 8 minutes. But what does this way of, let's say, increasing internationalism or internationality in the artistic work or perception mean? On one side you are, let's say, a Bosnian artist, but success means to become more and more international.
Yeah,
Is this a contradiction?
From Bosnia.
Or from Bosnia, sorry.
Well, that's what you mentioned, this international
Yes.
aspect. It's a like potential. It can go in both ways. It can go negative and positive. I think it's also, in my opinion, from my perspective, it's something positive, but it's not for everyone, and there is fluctuations in your own practice, and also how it influences with this travel, and sometimes you need some steady place or sometimes not as well. But yeah, like, I'm from Bosnia, and what whenever I apply or I'm invited from somewhere, there was like some certain exhibitions or projects or residencies that I'm particularly invited because I'm from Bosnia. And then you get into this position like you're some like, very, it's weird position, because then it's more about where you come from, and then they expect you to speak about certain topics. It's and it's not just from Bosnia. There's many countries that are kind of in the interest of someone, especially from West about the East and this kind of. And there are certain fundings coming to the certain countries. Yeah, so it's always this then bipolar position. You don't know, should you accept, because there is no maybe other possibilities to go. Especially if I'm from Bosnia, I don't have other possibilities. I don't have funding from my own country. I don't have I cannot earn enough to go somewhere, like every 2 months or 3. So it's mostly when I'm invited, or if I apply to somewhere and then get accepted. And then you always have somehow in your back brain, oh, is it maybe just because I'm from Bosnia, not because of my artistic practice sometimes, Because there is, the art scene is quite narrow, it's small, and then there is a lot of production. In the whole, I think, cultural program in not just in Bosnia, but like ex-Yugoslavia countries and so on.
And a very personal question at last. In the last weeks, did you have any kind of total significant experience here in Vienna? Maybe a confrontation of an artwork or something that was personal, that changed your perception? I know this is maybe
the
it's
context on Vienna.
Here.
I mean, Vienna, for me, feels like home. First of all, because almost 3/3 population is from Balkan, So, and then there is a lot of people that understands the work that I kind of do, but it's not like I have some huge brainstorming here or so. But these 3 months, it's still not over. I mean, but it helped a lot as a, someone who needs to work every day to pay bills, to pay rent, and then there is no time for personal development. It's really less and less. And then to have this kind of space and time to just reflect on your own activities, it's quite important. So for me, it was really productive in that sense.
And you shifted your living context from Sofia to Vienna. This is your home base now, Vienna. Vienna is your main base.
20 years ago, but the situation was totally different. So
yes,
like,
20 years ago it was totally different.
It was like different, and so nowadays it's changed the situation a lot. And so this distance before was much bigger than nowadays. It's not really a distance anymore. So it's not
now
so
you
much
have students.
Yeah. But also they mean. Yeah, we met with you last week to talk about this talk, and I was on the way to Sofia, I remember. So I was on the weekend there. I had a studio visit, so to say, without having a studio. So in a bar. So
in German language, like we say Pendler, somebody who is shifting permanently from one living place to his working place.
But
so,
it's. I like this experience because it's always giving energy. Also, like going to different. For example, I like very much going to Turkey because what comes through the media in Europe is like produce a big anxiety when you are there and have the chance to meet the people, to make your own experience. It makes more rich. Like it's the reality is always totally different than it's transported in the media. And so try to take this to my art.
But the media are different in different countries.
Yeah, but
the same story.
No, I think
complete
public
different.
opinion,
you read a different story. I noticed this when I lived in Russia. The story telling about one thing in Russia is a different one than the story which is told in Austria about the same thing, you know.
But I mean also
they are different.
How the situation really is. You have to experience with your own body. So you cannot now. How is it in Turkey or in Russia when you don't go there and experience through your own experience?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. Not sure about that.
Okay.
I don't know. Maybe. I don't know.
A very personal question, Levi. In the last weeks, what was your most significant experience here in Vienna? I know it's very, very personal, but
meet my partners in residency is something really important for me during this week because I share with them a lot, but I also learn a lot from them. The conversation with Mila and with all my partners. I am really happy to get that experience. But I mean, I don't have a specific moment in Vienna, but I really feel that the experience of Vienna for me, that 3 months, will be really interesting for develop more my work in another way. I mean, I feel here the way that they narrate the artwork, the project, how they it's working the art circle. Is something that I really think I can do something interesting in the future. I mean.
We have to complete this panel now. And in 15 minutes we continue to the other panel. And I thank you very, very much because we realized how that it's not possible to bring everything together or streamline it because there are so many individual experiences. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.